How do you talk about the downfall of a brand that's never been more successful on paper? For a whole generation of women, Celine wasn't just another French label. Under Phoebe Philo, it was a quiet kind of power. Clothes that let you move through your life without shouting for attention. Pieces you could actually live in. It was the rare luxury brand that felt like it understood you more than it tried to impress you. And then, almost overnight, that world disappeared. The accent vanished from the logo. The archive was wiped. The silhouettes shifted from grounded and thoughtful to sharp, skinny, and stage-ready. The woman who built her life around old Celine watched the brand carrying that name turn into something she barely recognized. Yet, behind the scenes, the numbers were exploding. So the real question isn't whether Celine fell, it's this. Is this a comeback story, or the slow death of a brand's identity? Celine's downfall doesn't start with Phoebe Philo. It starts decades before she arrives, with a house that never fully knew what it wanted to be. In 1945, Celine Vipiana and her husband opened a small made-to-measure children's shoe shop in Paris. It was practical, local, and very straightforward. Custom kids' shoes, a little red elephant logo, and a focus on comfort and craftsmanship rather than fantasy. Over time, the business shifted into women's footwear, then leather goods, and eventually ready-to-wear. By the 1960s and 70s, Celine was known for chic, sporty clothes for women who actually had somewhere to go, traveling, running errands, working, living their lives. The brand grew steadily through boutiques, leather goods, and international expansion. Celine became the kind of label you'd spot in good department stores and on quietly well-dressed women in European cities. In the 1990s, Bernard Arnault folded Celine into LVMH and tried to turn that polite respectability into something sharper. In 1997, he brought in Michael Kors as creative director. Kors added American gloss, clean sportswear, tailored coats, big smile campaigns, supermodel casting. It pushed Celine closer to the front row and gave it a bit more visibility. But it still didn't have that cult energy you see when a brand really means something to people. When Kors left in the mid-2000s, other designers followed, but none of them managed to give Celine a clear, modern point of view. By 2008, that was the real issue. Celine had history, stores, and a solid customer, but no sharp personality. In a decade dominated by louder, more directional houses, it felt like a well-mannered French brand drifting on autopilot, which is exactly when LVMH turned to Phoebe Philo to see if this quiet label could become something very different. When Phoebe arrived at Celine in 2008, she wasn't an unknown risk. She was already the woman who had revived Chloé earlier in the decade, then stepped away at the height of her success to focus on her family. When she came back, it was on her own terms, and Celine became the place where she translated that life into clothes. From the start, her approach was almost aggressively practical. She talked about wanting a back-to-reality wardrobe, pieces that were beautiful and strong, but driven by real life instead of runway fantasy. You could see that in the proportions. Coats that stood slightly away from the body instead of cinching it. Trousers that skimmed the floor. Dresses that moved when you walked instead of clinging to you. The palette was calm, camel, navy, black, cream, with the occasional jolt of color or print that felt deliberate, not decorative. What made it hit was who she was designing for, not a nightclub fantasy or an abstract muse, but a woman with an actual schedule, school run, commute, meetings, flights, dinner. Flat sandals sat next to heels, trainers appeared on runways, knitwear worked from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. It was fashion that respected how women actually live. Then the accessories turned that philosophy into a global signal. The luggage and phantom bags with their almost cartoon faces. The trapeze with its folded wings. The simple cabas totes and sleek sneakers. None of them screamed with logos, but they were instantly recognizable. If you worked in certain offices, law firms, magazines, agencies, consultancies, you started seeing them everywhere. Celine wasn't just a label you liked. It became the backbone of a whole wardrobe, That's when Old Celine turned from a nickname into a phenomenon. As seasons went by, specific pieces started to feel almost mythical. A foulard print shirt here, a porcelain detail choker there, the Madame boots, the Edge sunglasses. When they sold out in stores, they resurfaced on resale platforms at equal or higher prices. Archive accounts on Instagram started cataloging every look. Sourcing agents built entire businesses around tracking down past season Celine for clients who had missed it the first time. The women buying it weren't treating it like a trend. They were building wardrobes that could last a decade. Clothes that felt like extensions of who they were. Serious, busy, a bit tired, but still wanting to look sharp without performing for anyone. By the mid-2000s, that was the real power of Old Celine. It wasn't just successful, it was personal, which is why the announcement in 2017 that Phoebe Philo would step down hit so hard. Officially, it was positioned as the end of her 10-year chapter and a chance for her to step back from the intensity of running a major house. Unofficially, it felt like the end of an era. Fans rushed to buy final pieces, resale searches spiked, and Old Celine stopped being a casual nickname and became a line in the sand. So, when LVMH finally revealed who would replace her, Hedi Slimane, a designer known for a completely different vision of women, it didn't feel like a routine handover. It felt like the first step in dismantling a wardrobe a generation of women had just spent 10 years carefully building. By the time LVMH finally said Hedi Slimane's name out loud, everyone already knew Phoebe was leaving. What nobody expected was how fast the reset would hit. His title alone was a warning. Not just creative director, but artistic, creative, and image director. The same all-encompassing role he'd had at Saint Laurent. It meant this wouldn't just be a new hand on the sketchbook. He would control the photos, the campaigns, the shows, the stores, the mood. Celine wasn't just getting a designer, it was getting a new author. The first edits came quietly, and not on a runway. The accent disappeared from the logo. Celine became Celine. The brand's Instagram was wiped in one sweep, taking a decade of Phoebe's imagery with it. Officially, it was a clean slate. To Philophiles, it felt like a funeral. Then the debut show hit in September 2018. Instead of the grounded, slightly off-kilter woman of Old Celine, the runway was packed with very young, very slim models in short, sharp dresses, sequins, micro-hems, and strict little jackets. The energy was late night, club, 80s-tinged rock. If you'd followed Hedi at Dior Homme or Saint Laurent, it was hard not to see it. This looked a lot less like a new chapter of Celine and a lot more like Hedi Slimane, transplanted. The reaction was instant and vicious. Critics accused him of recycling his own work, of ignoring the woman who had actually built Celine into a cult, of dragging the house back into a narrower, more conventional idea of sex appeal. Where Phoebe's clothes had moved with women through their lives, this felt like clothes designed for an outside gaze. The casting, mostly young, mostly thin, largely white, only underlined that. Online, the grief hardened into action. Old Celine archive accounts exploded. Wardrobes were posted like shrines, rails of coats, neat rows of luggage bags, screenshots of old campaign images before the wipe. Resale searches spiked again. Phoebe-era pieces stopped being just good purchases and became evidence of loyalty. Proof that you'd been there for the version of Celine that now felt officially over. In fashion, creative handovers are supposed to be part of the game. Designers move, aesthetics shift, customers adjust. But what happened at Celine under Hedi Slimane didn't feel like evolution to its original base. It felt like waking up to find a different brand, wearing the same name. Inside LVMH, though, this wasn't treated as a collapse. This was a reset designed for growth. A new machine being built around Hedi's world with one clear expectation: make Celine bigger than it had ever been before. And, from a pure business perspective, that plan worked. While Philophiles were announcing Celine's death on Instagram, LVMH was watching something very different. A brand turning into a serious money maker. Under Hedi, Celine didn't just recover from the shock of the transition, it accelerated. New stores opened in prime locations, prices climbed, and industry estimates put Celine well above the €2 billion mark in annual sales. For LVMH, that's the only language that really counts. Hedi did it the way he always does, by turning the house into a total universe. He didn't just design clothes, he redesigned the spaces they lived in. Celine boutiques were stripped back and rebuilt in marble, metal, and pale wood, somewhere between an art gallery and a brutalist apartment. The point was clear the moment you walked in. This wasn't old Celine evolving. This was Celine by Hedi Slimane. He also pushed the brand far beyond women's ready-to-wear. Menswear became a core pillar, aimed at a younger, music-obsessed customer who wanted skinny tailoring, leather jackets, and tour wardrobe energy. Then came the fragrances and beauty. Nightclubbing, black tie, and the rest of the line turned his after-midnight mythology into glass bottles, supported by campaigns he shot himself. Step by step, every part of the house started to look like it came from one mind, his. At the same time, his casting and celebrity strategy pulled Celine into a different corner of culture. K-pop star Lisa became global ambassador, bringing in a new wave of fans who discovered the brand through performances and social media, not through runway reviews or department store buyers. For them, the old logo and the erased archive weren't personal traumas. They were just trivia. What mattered was that Celine now looked like the brand worn by the people they followed online. On the outside, that created a strange split. On resale platforms, old Celine pieces kept climbing in value, treated almost like a closed chapter in fashion history. Inside Celine's new stores, Hedi's sequined minis, biker boots, and sharp coats were selling to a different generation that didn't care what came before. One version of the brand was being archived and mythologized. The other was busy paying the bills. But success on a spreadsheet didn't mean everything was smooth behind the scenes. Hedi's control over imagery and access, the long-running tension with Vogue and Condé Nast, tightly curated guest lists, and his preference for working from a studio in Los Angeles, sat awkwardly inside a group that likes its big brands highly visible and tightly managed. Add in a very high salary and royalties, tied not just to clothes, but to imagery and fragrance, and you can see why, over time, the partnership became harder to sustain. The more Celine became a world built entirely around his eye, the more it tested how much freedom a conglomerate was really willing to give one man, even a man who had doubled the business. And that quietly growing tension is what brings us to the next chapter. What happens when the house decides it wants the growth without the person who built the machine? In the end, that tension was exactly what broke the partnership. By late 2024, Celine announced Hedi Slimane's exit with a carefully worded statement, thanking him for exceptional growth, praising the renewed codes of the house, and making it clear that his chapter was closed. The brand he'd blown past the $2 billion mark was now too big, too important to orbit entirely around one man's preferences and one LA studio. LVMH wanted the growth, but it also wanted more control. His successor, Michael Ryder, tells you everything about where Celine goes next. He's not an outsider with a radical new vision. He's a Phoebe-era insider who spent a decade as her design director before moving to Polo Ralph Lauren. His new title covers women's, men's, and leather goods, but stops short of that all-powerful image director role Hedi had. The message is subtle. The house will decide the world building this time, and already the signals are there. Early looks point back to wearability, softened tailoring, real-life coats and trousers, a more grounded French bourgeois mood. The reboot of the Phantom bag feels almost like an olive branch to the old Celine customer, a reminder that the brand once built its power on quiet pieces women could actually live in. So was this a downfall, or just a shift in ownership of the story? Celine hasn't collapsed. It's bigger than ever. But the soul of the brand moved from a small Parisian atelier to a woman who dressed women for their own lives, to a designer who turned it into a stadium-sized rock act, and now to someone tasked with stitching those fragments back together. Whether that works or not, is the real question. Is Celine on the brink of a new chapter? Or is this what a painful downfall looks like in modern luxury? Not a crash, but a brand that survives by becoming something entirely different from what its most loyal fans fell in love with. I am curious to hear your thoughts in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.